If there's one thing that Terry Pratchett got absolutely spot on in Guards, it is culture and class on the British and Irish Isles. Welcome back to StoryTube, everybody. I just started Discworld. I read Guards for the month of Alan, by the way. In case you haven't seen our tribute to Alan Walker from the Library of Alexandria, we are in the midst of June, in the midst of reading a bunch of books that Alan has recommended for years on Booktube. And I started off the month with Guards, and now I wanted to sit down and talk a little bit about it and add maybe a different voice to Booktube, an Irish voice, and why that might be a significant thing, or the fact that I might have seen some different things to what our American friends see in this book. And I want to talk a little bit about how Terry Pratchett handles the issue of class, or the theme of class in this book, that spoke to me quite strongly, and I think it's the dominant theme here, and all other themes permeate underneath it. Societal issues as a whole being dealt with a sense of satirical irony and playfulness, using the genre of fantasy that Terry Pratchett clearly loved so much. So if you're not familiar with Guards, I'll give a little bit of an explanation about what it is. Discworld is obviously a 41-something book series, but Guards is the first one in the City Watch books. I'm going to put it down because I'm just going to keep waving it around. Guards is the first one in the City Watch books, so I think there are 8 of those. There are many sub-series within the Discworld books. As far as I know, you can start with any of them. Now, the City Watch involves what is essentially the forgotten characters in fantasy. The Guards are, as Sir Terry Pratchett puts it in his little introduction piece, the ones that are sent in as cannon fodder to get killed off in the first 30 pages, and you follow our main hero outside of that. And they always remain on the periphery. So Terry Pratchett plays with this a lot, and he introduces us to a colourful cast of characters. So Commander Sam Vimes is the captain of the Night Watch. He is an archetypal everyman. He is a down on his luck, drunk. He kind of came across to me as a noir character, one of those characters from maybe 50s black and white movies, who's just a bit down on his luck. He's an alcoholic. Just life has kicked him down, and he's struggling to find meaning in his vocation. And then we have Nobby and Colin. Nobby is a human character. We're not exactly sure what he is. And Colin is your typical sergeant. He is described very well as the kind of person that you would absolutely see only rising to the rank of sergeant. Nobby, on the other hand, is somebody who's a bit tricksy. He likes to steal things from bodies and all that kind of thing, or people who are asleep. And we have a new member of the Watch, and it kind of is the start of the book, and that is Carrot, who is a 6'6" dwarf. He's not actually a dwarf, but he is an adopted dwarf, and he kind of acts as the catalyst to reignite the passion and the optimism and idealism in our other 3 characters to a certain extent. But Carrot is a youthful, almost naive, innocent teenager, basically, who has flown the nest for the first time. So Carrot he's called Carrot because he's ginger. He is immediately endearing. And what I'll say, those are just our 4 main group of the City Watch, or the Night Watch. And what I'll say is that Terry Pratchett is just wonderful at immediately introducing you to a character in one line. You don't have to work to know who these characters are and to get invested in them. He can perfectly paint a picture with a clever turn of phrase about who a character is in very few words. Our City Watch work in the city of Ankh-Morpork, which, as I understand, is one of the main cities on the Discworld. And it is ruled by the patrician veterinary, who is also a very interesting Machiavellian type tyrant, but far more complex than I think I was expecting going into it. All of the usual comparisons that people make are, of course, Monty Python, and I can see the Monty Python-ness of it all. absolutely. But I'll mention in a little while another couple of examples. Anybody here from Britain or Ireland will know what I'm talking about when I mention other influences or other things that I can see. But the main one obviously being Monty Python, and that comedy is in there. But I want to give a couple of examples of how Pratchett introduces characters, and it's fantastic stuff. So this is just one of the early lines describing the patrician. The patrician didn't believe in unnecessary cruelty. He didn't believe in pointless revenge, but he was a great believer in the need for things to be sorted out, while being bang alongside the idea for necessary cruelty, of course. It's just a very clever way of telling you exactly who this character is and how he rules. And I'll show you another couple as well. So there's a character by the name of Cut Me Own Throat Dibbler, which feels like a very British-Irish nickname for a character like this, and I'll make a comparison later specifically to do with class and culture in Britain and Ireland about this kind of character. But Cut Me Own Throat Dibbler is basically, he's a market trader, and he's introduced in the following way. He was a purveyor of absolutely anything that could be sold hurriedly from an open suitcase in a busy street and was guaranteed to have fallen off the back of an ox cart. So that is just exceptional character introduction. You know exactly who this person is, and this is a running theme throughout the whole book. Every character that he introduces is so vivid and so rich, but not just a caricature. I find that when he introduces these characters, especially the Night Watch, and I think Lady Sybil Ramkin as well, she initially comes across as quite a upper class snooty type of character, maybe a little eccentric, but she's far more than what meets the eye. The basic plot of this book is that a secret society, the Elucidated Brethren, along with their Grand Master, are hatching a plan to unleash a dragon upon Ankh-Morpork to get the patrician out of power, or usurp the patrician's power and install a king. And the City Watch have to foil this plot. So to me, what Pratchett is doing with this book is he's talking about dissatisfaction with the general ruling of things in society. And since this book was written in the late 80s, I want to mention a little bit, and I'm going to pull away from the book for a second. I want to talk a little bit about what Britain and Ireland were like in the 80s. Specifically in urban areas, class has always been an issue in Britain, and it's often dealt with in literature, in film, in comedy, and it gets highlighted in urban areas where you have great disparities of wealth. And of course, Ireland, having been a British colony for 700-800 years, we're not going down that road, was highly influenced by that. And the culture that we now have, while meshed with our own Irish culture, is very similar to that. So I connected with a lot of the stuff in this book, especially having grown up in Dublin City. It's a very similar socio-geographic setup as a place like London. So there's great disparities in wealth, and there's always a middle to upper class versus working class divide. So as I'm talking about this, apologies in advance if my Dublin accent starts to get a little bit stronger. I usually neutralize my Dublin accent quite a lot, but as I talk about some of these characters and some of the things that I'll mention, my accent might start to come out just naturally. So apologies in advance if you can't understand what I'm saying. So I think each of the characters kind of represents an aspect of a certain kind of person that was in Britain and Irish cities in that time period. And I'm sure this is obviously a universal issue as well, but I think Pratchett is specifically with the vernacular that he's using in this book. It's all similar slang to what we have here in Dublin as well. Specifically, Dublin and London slang is quite similar. We use a lot of similar phrases, but there's also a similar way of looking at things, especially to do with class. So, for example, in Dublin, the city can be historically divided in two halves, the north and the south. So the north side is the typically working class area, and the south side is the typically British ruling elite area. So it was where perhaps British landlords would have settled or business had been established. And the north side of the city, which is separated by a river, is the more working class, subjugated part of the city. Obviously, in recent decades and with the passing of time, that has changed, but the after effects are still there. So in the 1980s in Britain and Ireland, it was a time of economic hardship, putting it mildly. You couldn't get a job in Dublin in the 80s. You couldn't get a job in London in the 80s. You had to do what you could to survive. And I think there are certain characters in here that just represent a go-getter attitude and a cynical attitude, and then a I have given up kind of attitude. And that was also prevalent in a lot of comedy and TV that was done at the time here in Ireland and especially in the UK. So naturally, us being so close to the UK, we got a lot of British sitcoms when I was growing up. And Pratchett's writing, even more so than Monty Python, which is the example that everybody uses, and it's there, I can see that for sure. The big comparisons that I would make here are a sketch comedy show called The Two Ronnies.
4 candles.
Well, there you are, 4 candles.
No, 4 candles. Handles for forks.
And that one, specifically for the wordplay that Terry Pratchett uses here, and the double meaning phrases that he uses for comedic effect, but for also to highlight something, some injustice or something that's ridiculous about society. He'll phrase it in a way that it has two meanings, the comedic one, and then if you think about it a little bit harder, there'll be something that he's trying to say with it. And that reminds me also a lot of Father Ted, which is an Irish sitcom about priests.
How does that gobshite get on the television?
If you know anything about Ireland's relationship with the Catholic Church, we haven't always had a good relationship with the Catholic Church, but there's a lot of those kinds of phrases and double meanings and just witty comedy that highlights some aspect of society that they're trying to tackle. And also I see a lot of influence from sitcoms such as Only Fools and Horses.
I knew you was cheating, Boycie.
Oh yeah, how?
Because that wasn't the hand that I dealt you.
Which is was a favourite of mine growing up, and the fact that this book reminded me so much of Only Fools and Horses was a reason I enjoyed it so much. So I mentioned the character called Cut Me Own Throat Dibbler. He's a market trader, he sells anything he can get his hands on. He reminded me so much of Del Boy, Derek Trotter, from Only Fools and Horses.
I knew you was cheating, Boycie.
Oh yeah, how?
Because that wasn't the hand that I dealt you.
While you can think of characters like these as caricatures, I found them all to be profoundly human. So Sam Vimes is kind of, as I said, a down on his luck character, but you can tell that he's just dissatisfied with the way things are being done in society. He's dissatisfied with how the patrician and the ruling class have structured society in a way that the common folk are forgotten. And this class issue is just constantly at the forefront of my mind reading this book, or was at the forefront of my mind reading this book. Similar to characters in Only Fools and Horses, which is of course a sitcom, and of course it can get ridiculous and absurd at times. The characters in that are profoundly human and are saying a lot about the working class struggle, especially at the time. And I found the character of Sam Vimes specifically, while Dibbler was the more surface level representation of that's Del Boy right there, I felt Sam Vimes was very much similar to characters like those from Only Fools and Horses, where he's just dissatisfied with the general structure of society. He's a bit cynical and pessimistic because of the fact that he feels he can't contribute what he has inside, because society won't allow him to do that. And it was very endearing to see him go on this journey in this book, especially with the addition of Carrot, who I think kickstarts this. He lights a spark in him again to recreate or regain the honour that he sees in the City Watch and maybe start to slowly change society for the better. And I think that this is similar to things like Porridge, like Only Fools and Horses, these BBC sitcoms that I grew up on and clearly Pratchett had watched as well. It seems quite obvious to me. So I don't want to give too many details about the book itself. These are just some of the comparisons that made the read all that more enjoyable for me. I think overall I'm sitting at around a 4 stars just because the plot wasn't necessarily fully engaging the whole time, but I found the characters were so colourful but so profoundly human that it really worked for me. And the extra touch of that class divide, that commentary on British and Irish culture, just displayed to perfection with the vernacular as well, a lot of the slang in it, Bob's your uncle, which I didn't even know was not a universal phrase. All of that just added an extra bit of flavour to the read for me. I don't know why it's taken me this long to read Pratchett, but I think I had a certain preconceived notion of what the absurdist humour would be, and I don't know why I did, because I love sitcoms like Only Fools and Horses. So to wrap it up, I think this was a great place for me to start with Discworld. I've gone and I've bought some more City Watch books because I can see the room for growth as well, and how I can become even more attached to these characters going forward. I think this was a great book. I don't think it was absolutely perfect, but it was wonderful to read something that I found nostalgic, even though I hadn't read it before. But I found it nostalgic for a simpler time watching those comedies growing up, and it was a big callback to a general sentiment in the writing of how people felt back in the 80s. My dad talks about this quite often, of how things were back in the 80s in working class Dublin, and I felt it very strongly come out in this book. So I really enjoyed it. I really loved it. I will be continuing with Men at Arms. I don't know when, but I've also picked up Mort, so I'm very excited to try more Discworld. So I hope you enjoyed my sort of review of Guards. I hope it was coherent. I'd love to hear what you guys get out of this book. I know a lot of the audience might be in the US. Booktube has a lot of people from the US, so I'd be interested to hear if you guys would want to watch some of these sitcoms that I've mentioned. And any people from Britain or Ireland who might be watching, comment down below and let me know if you see any of the comparisons or the similarities that I see, like Cut Me Own Throat Dibbler is Del Boy. Try convince me that he's not. Like the video if you like the review, leave a comment down below and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.